first I'll start with just sort of a brief explanation of the project. It was called Obliquo. It was for a competition I did with Sergio Salas in 2018, I believe. And it was for it was a project in Barcelona, Spain, and it was a renovation of this old governmental building. And they were turning it from this old disused administrative building into housing. So what we had proposed is sort of like this insertion of new housing block within the old, so strip out all the slabs and walls of the government structure and just put in this new housing block. And then it would be this new housing that just sits within this old building, and you get these like this really nice contrast between the old and the new. So you can see these like this pink unit behind the old structural wall, and it had sort of marketplace on the bottom. But anyways, with this render, what I was trying to go for was this the contrast between the new on the left and the old on the right. So I'll break it down. First, I'm going to show you a couple tips in Rhino. I'll show you that right now, and then I'll show you the entire Photoshop process, sort of breaking it down layer by layer and like intent by intent as well. Okay, so first, before we jump into the 3D model, I'm just going to quickly show you. So this is another image I made, and this is much more recent than the last one. I mean, I'm not saying it's better, but it's just more recent and much more efficient. This probably took me like 1/3 the time it took to make the other one. Obviously, because of lack of complexity, but also just because the knowledge curve has increased, so I understand how to make things faster. Anyways, so just a couple notes on this one. As you can see, so this is just showing a gallery in an old space, so it's a renovation. And I just want to point out that modeling, like spending 10 minutes to model details, is critical. Like even if it's like, for example, these lights up here, like on the rails, like these sort of gallery lights, they add so much realism and dynamism to the scene. And also, and I mean, they're so small. I only modeled one light and then one rail. I maybe just changed the color of the rail to black, and that was it, But it really adds that feeling that immediately that this is a gallery, and it adds like super small touches. And this is also more of an artistic touch than a technical touch, because you just have to know what pieces of the model will be important to show, or like what small details will like give the most emphasis, If I put trash in the corner, it wouldn't quite be such a good meaning. Or if I put like a cable, for a light on the ground, it might not have the same meaning. But these are very free and up in the ceiling, so they're quite nice. Also, I must say the ceiling itself is quite good with how the light sort of comes down off this lowered ceiling, because I mean, most ceilings in public spaces are not just a perfectly flat thing. It has multiple dimensions, right? So there's layers and there's light coming. There's obviously recessed light in this. Anyways, one other detail I'd like to point out is over here in this right corner, because it's a renovation, these white panels that make up this white wall to the right, they're new construction, so they're actually fit in between the existing columns. And on purpose, we actually modeled them to be slightly smaller, so just leaving a tiny gap in between the existing column structure, and then these white panels that fill it in. And anyways, but in the overall spectrum of it, it really gives a nice sort of feeling to that area, because it feels real, right? Because there's small gaps, there's small dark spots that interrupt. Nothing is perfectly three-dimensionally, like to the 0.00000 accuracy of touching each other. There's always small gaps and whatnot. And so I would, for example, one thing that I would recommend doing in your model is you set up your scene, obviously, And then one thing is you can take your floor and just take your floor and drop it 5 millimeters, you know? So when you start to render, you get a tiny, tiny, tiny light gap. So there's a small area of shadow around your entire floor in between the walls and the floor and whatnot. And just lifting small pieces off each other, it makes like a world of a difference when to make it more realistic. Also note in the upper left hand corner where the concrete is meeting the wall, you see how you can actually see that there's a gap in between the white wall meeting this concrete. So there's a slight black void. And this is just made by making a slight offset in the wall and just deleting away part of it. Booleaning it away. Boolean, God, that's a hard word to say. But it adds just to the overall life of the scene. Of course, you have to have that artistic talent to be able to make one to begin with, but that adds like the slightest touch of realism to the overall thing. And then jumping into Rhino, I think it's important to know a few things before sort of rendering out a scene. I would say besides modeling out those details, which you should probably do in Rhino, it would have benefit greatly. So here is, so just jumping into this, look at this, let's just say that this is a wall. Here, I'll show you what I was talking about before. So this is a wall, and this is the trim of the wall down here. And then you have the main part of the wall, and then you have the floor. We can expand this, doesn't really matter. Anyways, so let's look at it, what it is viewing in rendered mode. So this is what your Vray render will somewhat output, something along these lines of the details. Anyways, here's a really nice tip in something that I only learned recently, so this is like totally new information. Anyways, what normally happens when you UV texture is it creates these like very perfect seams and perfect corners, which in reality, when you look around you, nothing is quite, 90 degrees. At an angle, it's always meeting with like dulled edges or something. So here, this tip right here is a lifesaver. If you select your object, this would be something you would do right before you render. And this is a really great process because it's non-destructive, so it's not adding additional faces or more, it's not going to slow down the render time. It's going to, and it doesn't destroy your object model. It allows you to be able to further manipulate it without totally destroying it. But it's this in here in the properties tab. So you have your object properties, and then go over here, and there's edge softening. By the way, this is Rhino 6, if you'll notice. So make sure you have Rhino 6, which I highly recommend. It's great. Anyways, if you go to this edge softening, you can turn this on. And what it will do, it'll actually perfectly smooth out your corners. And you can, of course, play with this 0.1, 0.05, or 05, or whatnot. So you can sort of play with this. And you can get this really nice corner details. So that when you render it out, it doesn't look like you have those sharp edges. Everything looks a little bit more realistic. So I first off highly recommend that. And so this will also leave a gap between the floor, as you can see. Oh god, as you can see here, it'll make a tiny little that fillet will make a small gap. But what I was saying before about dropping the floor down is you take this and you go down minus 0.1. Let's see, I don't know the dimension. Okay, that's okay. Minus 0.1 is the smallest amount. But what this will do is it'll create that black shadow gap. So you can do this for almost anything. Like if you had a ceiling, for example. Let's just make this. Sorry. Copy V for vertical, and then move this plane up to the top. So now you can see that ceiling intersection over here. Let's just look at this. If you also move it up to 0.1 as well, and you can create these like this little shadow gap that will be in every single area. Even though it may not look, you'll have to play with how it looks in your render, but I recommend just like the smallest amount. Because when you render it out, you won't actually see any blackness back there. Like, I mean, that black is a bit exaggerated for the rendered preview, but it'll mean everything when you actually have V-Ray, and it just adds a whole nother touch of realism in terms of like that wall sitting in between just a simple floor and ceiling. What else? I could go into a lot more detail on Rhino, but I think I'm just going to keep this to Photoshop because there's so many technical things within Rhino. Over here, obviously you have Vray, and I would recommend using Vray for your renderings. It's free to download on the Chaos Group website for a trial. So I think you get a month free, which is pretty great. And you're a student actually, so you should have an educational license, which also is pretty great. Anyways, I'm going to jump into Photoshop now and show you around there. Okay, so this is what the image that I actually received from Vray. As you can tell, it's very far off from the image that I had shown you previously. What the couple things I do want to point out is just the materials. On the left, I had a stucco texture on this, like some purple stucco, which was interesting. And then on the right, I had some sort of stone. So these were sort of just the materials I applied. I applied very few things in Vray because I knew I was just going to do a lot of it in Photoshop. One, because I wasn't very good at Vray on the time of making this. And two, I think sort of the atmosphere comes from Photoshop. It's pretty hard to get more than just a base atmosphere from Vray. Anyways, this shot really was interesting in a technical standpoint, also and interesting in like what I was trying to achieve. What I was really trying to show was, which is actually even more important than the technical portion, is showing like what does your image want to show. And so for this one, I really wanted to show this contrast between the housing, this colored object, you know, this like concrete object that we were sticking in the middle of this old building, just retaining like the bare minimum structure needed to keep it standing with the facade, and then some reinforcement between the facade and the interior building. And other than that, I just wanted to show these like void spaces that we were creating between like the living on the left and the old structure on the right. So doing this lighting is like key. So with this one, I really wanted to show like this like high noon lighting, very high overhead, and it was sort of cutting diagonally across this image. And this is just to reinforce, you know, the division between this old and the new. The lighting, so the lighting would split the scene in half as well. And this is probably the most important thing in the entire. It's just having sort of that artistic vision of what you want to be able to show with your render. Because you could just render this plain. I could have just rendered like a basic lighting, you know, 5 p.m., not manipulated the lights or whatnot, and had a totally different appearance. So, but I think this one was best, and actually probably one of the more successful things I've ever rendered. So these three things down here are pretty critical. These three of these render channels thing. This is where in the render channel folder, this is where the outputs from Vray are. So this one, you can isolate these by holding down Alt and then clicking on the eye over here. So this white layer is the alpha channel. So this is just selecting what in the image is actually any sort of render and what's the background. If you save it to a PNG, this will become transparent, like with the checker mark, which is very helpful for selection for sky, for example. You just know we need to put the sky in there and whatnot. Then again, if you do, oh god, my computer's lagging because of the rendering. Anyways, so this is selecting the alpha here. Then this one is another one. This is called the material ID, where green is what I assigned that stone texture from Vray, and this is you assign these colors in Vray. So do in the Vray options, and the black was sort of the other thing. And this allows you with like if you click W, you'll go to the over here as well, the magic wand tool, and now you can, for example, quickly, you have to be on this layer, and then you can quickly select what you want to change that stone color here. So this is easily in the opposite. You can select the purple, and this is very easy to to select. This just creates like helpful selections. And also, so then this, so if you alt click down on this, then you do the same again, alt click again, and it returns to what you had previously selected. And this is another layer. This is called the render ID, where it takes every sort of geometric input into Vray and isolate and creates a unique color for each one. So you can actually, in this one, you can actually see how I built this thing. Each one of these floors was built as one solid closed polygon, and then this is more a weird combination of floors and window pieces and whatnot. But this also allows, so for example, with W, now I can select, for example, these beams that are going across in the foreground if I want to change those beams, and then Alt click on that again, and now look, I've selected those in this view, which would be much harder to do if you're just using the polygon lasso tool or whatnot. Anyways, then Control D to deselect, just so we don't mess up anything. And then Alt click on this again. Oh, okay. We can turn that off. So I always put these in the bottom of my file, just to keep it organized. Instead, then we have the background above. Okay, so then looking at this is where, so that's just like sort of storage and the base setup, what you get from Vray. You put those images down, you organize it. I would say this image also, one more note is I didn't take in, this is before I sort of knew about that softening of the edges, for example, when you're actually modeling, and that could have helped a lot in this image, is getting rid of this sort of like the perfect, like does concrete really look like that in reality? It would have sort of a chamfer on these edges. It never comes to a sharp corner. Same with this. This is worn down stone, so this could have used some of that, regardless of how bad the texture that was already placed on here. Recently, I've gotten much better by UV texture placement, but so that's sort of funny to look back at at what I had created before. Anyways, so these layers here are just simple clipping masks that from that render ID layers I'd done before. I just stored them up here just for ease. Oh yeah, here, let me turn these on. So this is just a sky. I just placed a sky in the background. You just very light, so it doesn't distract. I think I put it at a certain opacity, so you'd basically not be able to notice the sky. It'd become much more subtle and in the background. Anyways, and then so moving on. I really wanted to detail what the bricks on the right would look like. And I wanted to add, and so this texture had been here. Like, sorry, I have to turn on all these layers. This was just some simple details. I just went and got some stone textures and just quickly photoshopped them in. I wanted to add a slight level of detail that overwhelmed that really bad texture that I got from Vray. So I just isolated these quad faces that I knew were in the foreground, so I knew it should have more detail in them. And I then just added with masks in these stone detail I found from some sort of Google images. So Control D to deselect. So I knew I wanted those done in here. So here is then these adjustments that I spent a long time sort of detailing how we would treat this old stone texture. I think maybe I would do this differently now, but I think this came with a whole cobble of details, different levels of adjustments and whatnot. One of the main things was this stone. I just used the selection from this mask here, and I overlaid a color onto it. I knew that would of course change it. And these are all overlaid using these adjustments here. So you can see I had it on soft light, but each one of these, which you can cycle through with just using the arrow keys, will give you a totally different effect. And so here, let's go to soft light here. That's the one I ended up leaving on, and always use different opacities. Like I think opacity, which you can change up here, is critical for having things. Not everything should be 100% opaque, transparent, and nothing should be fully opaque. There's always about creating these different depths. And then these are just some adjustment layers. So for example, if you double click on this,
So I increased the brightness and I increased the contrast quite a bit. And then here, this other adjustment layer that I placed on here, I desaturated it from the Vray output, and I decreased the lightness a little bit, and so I had it at -9. But you can see how these things can so radically change the overall image. So now let's move on to the pink adjustments. Okay, so then now looking, so I was sort of dealing with the right side, and I got that to this nice like light sandstone color, which was the existing color. I mean, I could see pictures of the building, so I knew I could sort of work with this color. But this on the left side, this is actually a lot more work because we didn't know what the color of the interior building should actually be. So this was actually a pretty interesting moment because we were actually experimenting with the architecture in Photoshop. Because when you're modeling, we don't quite have an idea about the color. We knew something, it should be some sort of pinkish, purplish, violet. We wanted a high contrast, so when you look through the windows of these, the old facade, you'd see something very new on the interior, right? And something very lively and exciting. Anyway, so this is what we ended up with. I mean, this is just achieved through many layers. Like, for example, I was changing the hues and saturations here. So I was changing the vibrance, which sort of brings out colors, and saturation here. Curves, so I was removing blacks and then I was increasing the lightness, saturation in this. And these, basically you could probably achieve this with much less than the amount of adjustments I had here. By the way, you can find the adjustments in this little guy. And if you want to turn it on, you can go to Windows Adjustments, and that's where you see all of these. So for example, the hue, saturation, color balance, levels, brightness, curves, everything. Everything lives in here. All you have to do is click on this. So here, actually, I'll demonstrate. If you want a new hue saturation, let's say I want to go here and I want to now change this hue saturation. So I click that and I get a new one. Now right now, this hue saturation, so clicking here, if I change this saturation, it's changing the entire image. So I can go to here, let's do this. If I brighten it, it's doing the entire image, which is sort of a problem. That's sort of where masks are for, and what you've done before is you've saved out these left side, right side, the new masks. So you can actually click on this, and then holding Alt, which duplicates, you can drag that mask up here, and then when you do this, you replace the layer mask, yes. And now this new hue saturation isn't going to do the whole image. It's just going to do the area that we've decided. So this is where you can play around like this. Like maybe now you can actually just change basically everything. You can change colors, anything. This yellow is sort of interesting. So that's sort of how I did it. This was a lot of time just spent legitimately tweaking hue saturations. The reason I did multiple of them is because I would, for example, make one of these in one day, and then the next day I would be coming back and I would change it and do this, and I want to make sure I saved what I had here. I mean, there's other ways of doing that, but it was sort of like a creative process of just stacking things on top of each other and whatnot, which is really interesting. Then another sort of piece that I did was I knew in this image you don't see into the apartments that much, which is good because seeing inside of apartments was it's kind of hard to detail. So I just spent a little bit of time just placing some textures into this one because I knew that was sort of the only room you could really get a slight glimpse into. So I did spend just some time quickly just dropping in some shadows. Like you can see, this layer is just what I had obviously done is going to the render channels. And then, maybe I didn't. Because I actually did those all at the same time. So I must have selected just quickly. Here I can actually show you exactly how I did this. If you type in L, you get this lasso tool. And so then you can just click. I'm going to be a little rough here, just trying to demonstrate. Actually, here, let's get that. Perfect. Ding. Then double click to close. and then switch to, here, I'm going to make a new layer to do this on so I don't mess up anything. Click B for your brush tool, and then go to your brushes and just create a much more regular one with 0 hardness, so it's very soft. And then Alt and right click to scale forward and back like this. It's quite a convenient way. Anyways, and then make sure you're on black. You can just go to black. And then what I would do is I would do this, because there's more shadows coming from the inside than the outside. So you're gonna get this illusion of darkness in the back. So it creates something like that. And then of course the most critical moment is, oh god, this rendering thing is covering the opacity. Sorry, I have to move this. But you can bring this opacity, so you just bring that opacity down, and it starts giving you just that little bit of depth. I'll go there. So I mean, quickly, that's sort of how I do a lot of the detail work in any of my renders. It's just adding like slight layers with gradients of black or white, just to either get darkness or lightness, and that's something really important for adding depth, because that didn't come from Vray, if you noticed. That was just Photoshop. And another kind of funny thing is this is done in Barcelona, so this is part of our like design process, right? Was we experimented just with overlaying a Catalan flag on top of their architecture. We we thought maybe that would help us win the competition, which would have been actually quite funny. But this is just, I just kept this in here just so you could see like sort of how radically you can change a building with just one layer of in Photoshop. Okay, so now that I sort of have the colors that I'm going for within my image, I can really start to see how vibrant I've made the pink, this like salmon colored, and then the yellow of the old building. Really, the sky is super desaturated, so it's very light, and it doesn't clash with the other colors. It's just sort of in the background, letting you know that that's outdoors. I have these really nice shadows going on. Some of it's a bit confusing, but it's okay. That's just sort of the texturing. Definitely, if I redid this, I would fix this texturing on this right side. The texturing on the left isn't so bad. It's the stucco is sort of nice. Anyways, but now sort of like this moment when you need to add life, because this is a very just pure geometry, like, right, showing which angles you've chosen, whatnot, which is not what architecture is about. It's more about like what life and whatnot you can bring to housing in this scenario. So what I did was I started creating these facade elements. Actually, this is interesting. So actually, here's another tip. If you right click on a pixel here, it also tell you which one, what layers are apparent there. So layer 25, this was not on previously. I just had that stored because I was using this. So actually here I can show you what I was doing. As I was using this piece, and I was sort of, because it was because I didn't model this, I was forced to do this manually, which is not ideal, but it's okay, it happens. So I was like distorting, which if you do Control T, you get the deform controls, and then you can use, holding down Control, you can grab these points and start manipulating them to how you need them. Of course, it's not three-dimensional, so it gives you sort of a wrong effect, right? That doesn't have this depth now in this image, but it is sort of nice, and it has this interesting collage-y feel, which I actually enjoy. I sort of like the fact that these shutters are very one-dimensional. You know, they like stacked on. Anyways, so for just really quickly, I can transform that into the perspective like that. There's much better ways to go about doing this as well. I'm going to delete this layer because it's not there. But that for now will suit the purpose. All these facade elements that I add, which is all have these blue colors next to it. I did some Catalan flags because needed that. There's some more hue and saturation where I sort of selected all of these panels. These are these shutter panels that I had done. There's a lot of them. And I was just basically coloring them. So I brought in this brown one, and then using these things I transformed. So levels, just to bring, like, here, I'll show you what's actually within the other levels. But I brought this slider that's here. I brought it all the way from over here and just removed all the blacks from this and just brightened the whole thing up. So I think it was around here, I think. Anyways, I can control Z. So there it is. That's what I had before. And then this hue saturation, which I can show you again, I just changed it to -29. So actually pink, and I just brought it to, if you just type in -29 here, it goes to that sort of pinkish, because I just wanted it to sort of match the art, the walls, the concrete and whatnot that I had in there. So all of these things were essential. Oh, actually, here's an interesting thing I also did as well. So this was actually how it is, because you're seeing walls here, but I wanted to simulate windows. So what I did was this is not amazing, but I selected all of the spots where I wanted windows, which if you do control and click on this, you're now seeing where I had highlighted. So all these spots I wanted to show reflections of windows. And I actually took a screenshot of the overall render at that time, which is this one. And as you can see, I reversed it. So I exported out a JPEG and I actually brought it back in here and then placed it within these images. So now you're seeing this stone is coming from right here and this thing is coming from right here. So it's just mirroring it, and it's sort of in the glass refraction. Of course, you could do infinitely more detail in this, but I'm always running late on time, and so I always try to cheat as much as possible. This little Buddha guy brought a lot of life and vibrancy to the image, as you can tell right there. Okay, so that's sort of the facade elements, and then plants is another thing. We really wanted to emphasize that there was these gardens and whatnot out, so people could garden and do their thing out in the space. So I added a lot of plant textures. I won't really go into that. It's just these are all PNGs downloaded from Google Images and then clipped out when they need to be. For example, this plant, so it looks behind the column and whatnot. And then just a few more entourage sort of things. These curtains of clothes drying, just to bring some life into this image. It's sort of nice seeing this like built in front of my eyes. So then this is probably the most important thing in the entire image. Here, let me close or minimize these guys. So now that you've sort of brought in this this level of detail, so you can tell life is happening in this. What I always like to do is add atmosphere, right? So when you're looking at colors in reality, they actually desaturate over distance. There's a haze, so the Earth's atmosphere actually creates a haze, and it somewhat lightens and desaturates what you're seeing, and reduces the amount of contrast. So what I wanted to do was, and I don't want to emphasize that in this image, so I brought in, here, oh, sorry, I need to turn on this layer. So I brought in this fog. Obviously this is a way over exaggeration of what it would be, but I sort of just brought in this fog in the background, which is here. I can actually recreate this in about 5 seconds. New layer, B to get the paintbrush tool. If you have the black and white here, click X and it'll swap them. So now here, let's just go like, so now look, I've put some white stuff in there. And then I created a mask, which here, let's control click on this. Oh, so I wanted to bring those plants out from back. Well, anyways, then what I was talking about before is I can go to these render channels, and I know here, let's alt click on this. So now to bring that up, let's select this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. Let's select some of these columns that are beams in the foreground that are being covered in fog. If this fog was actually in the background, it would not cover these beams, so there would be some things that are in the front of it. So then you can alt click on this again. So now you're back. So now I'm back up at this layer, this new atmospheric fog that I've created here, and then using the eraser tool, which is E for eraser tool, and then make sure you have that full opacity. I can either actually wait here. No, I'll show you way better. This is how I would have done it then, but here's how I will do it now. Wait, Control Z. Sorry. Control Alt. So now what you do is you mask it. You come down here to this circle dot, and you mask it. Actually, right now it's an inverted mask. So if you double click on this, scroll down, there's this invert. So now it's everything but those things that I had selected. So now those things all pop out. I kind of chose a poor. Oh God. Here, let's reduce. Oh man, I have to move this. The little recording button is in front of that. Sorry. So let's reduce that so it doesn't destroy us. And look, I've already created some more here. Let's turn off the old atmospheric fog. So there's the new atmospheric fog, and now you can go in and in the mask mode, you can do UB, sorry, and you can now start erasing away the fog, maybe concentrate it more in the depth. And so now you have created some atmospheric fog, which looks really, really nice. I highly recommend playing with this because this is probably the most important. I'm going to delete that so I can just use the old one, but that's probably the most important image or important thing to enhance this entire image. I realize this is going on for quite a while, so let me just quickly get through a lot of this. These are people. These are just people I brought in from Skolgubar, which is a good website. But there's many of them. You just search people, cut out PNG. There's plenty of people that you can bring in. I really wanted to emphasize that there's someone playing riskily on the end in the end of this. I got a lot of comments from people saying that this is very dangerous, minimal railings, not much safety features in this building, but you know, that's not what it's about. So I'm okay with letting that slide. Yeah, transparency. So these are actually on a level of transparency, even though they're people, right? People are not transparent, but just to enhance your image, you know, putting these people here, putting them in the background, letting them not speak as loudly as this person in this, you know, these plants in the front. Very in the foreground, they need to be super opaque and like contrasty. And you see I've made minimal contrast in the background images, and it's already starting to come together to what you, in the end, you'll see. This image I brought in, okay, what is this? Okay, so this is actually light. I just quickly simulated my own beam of light, which I can now do. Here, I'll show you again. So L is in, here, I'll make a new layer. L is in lasso tool. So I could see the angle of the light coming in. So it's something like this. Here, I'll just do this over here so it stands out. So here. So let's just say I want to see a ray of sunlight coming in here. This is nothing more than just, I click B. So I'm in the white. So now I've created this. Here, I'm going to move this so I can get to the opacity again. Lower that opacity a lot. Actually, you might not even be able to see it anyways. And then okay, I can see it here. I just don't really want this sharp edge. You can see the sharp edge running down here. If you just go along with an E, which is the eraser tool, just start erasing away that sharp edge. And now you can see I've created like this beam of light just like pouring in, which is not so apparent, but it does add up when you start stacking these sort of things. Moving on, these are just some more Photoshop pieces I had done just to enhance these like platforms that we'd stuck out in this space. So I put some nets and grading and stuff, just more PNGs overlaid. And so basically we're at the end of how I created this image, except for there's a few critical pieces. So now that you have all of your stuff sort of stacked on top, a lot of times it's somewhat hard to make it all cohesive within each adjustment layers throughout your thing. So the tan adjustment layers and whatnot. So it's nice to always sort of go back and do adjustment layers that are over the entire project, right? So here in green we have these adjustments. By the way, you can color your layers in Photoshop by right-clicking on them and just coming down here. So look, green, or I could do orange, you know, or whatever. Let's keep it green. Where is it? Green. And so here, this is the last adjustment layer I'd done I had just taken the levels and just bumped them all up so it was a little bit more vibrant. I just um, put these little sliders in from the ends just to brighten up the blacks, brighten up the whites, and that. And here, this another thing. I did not use this in this image, but this is an adjustment called. It's here in the adjustments tab, and it's called a where is it? It's called the color lookup. Here, I'll just create another one here. Delete this guy. And what this does is it allows you to have these things called LUTs. So I'm not exactly actually sure what they are, but they basically simulate different films and different types of image. And so what you can do is you can load this in and actually, here, if you click on 2D strip, you can see how radically the image changed. And then just using the arrow keys, you can scroll through these different adjustments. So that's sort of interesting. It's pretty cool. But you can see how this, like applying one layer to the entire thing really makes it pop. So that one is actually pretty nice. So I didn't do this when I made my image, but that is a possibility of what you can do. So here, so I'm going to delete that because I didn't use that. This is what the actual final image is. But another thing is you can do is sort of black and white, desaturate at the end. This looks really good with this high contrasted area. This really shows where you have high contrast and where I don't have high contrast. High contrast in the foreground, minimal contrast in the background, using fog and also hue saturation layers. I'm going to turn that off. And so that's sort of the process of getting through that. I didn't want to make this like sort of a technical tutorial in Photoshop because I feel like that's pretty simple. You can just quickly search in YouTube, quickly ask someone. You can ask me, reach out to me, there's no problems there. But this is more sort of about creating how would you want to create your own atmosphere. And of course, this is sort of up to your artistic judgment. Everyone has their own tastes, but I was trying to sort of walk you through how I was building up this image in my mind. Of course, I wasn't even building up this image in my mind because I didn't know what it was when I first started. I did not know what to expect. So you can also see in some regards what we curated out, what we put in and then changed. I would say the most valuable things you can sort of do are these adjustment layers. These guys, they all live in the adjustments. You can adjust anything in here. And also opacities. I think people don't play with opacities enough. And then just sort of fun, right? Like including little details that might not be so apparent. And if you went to a real rendering company, they might not include, or actually a real rendering company would of course include those little details, but your average render would not include like, flags or clothes hanging in the background of an image, but it's those little details that really like speak wonders about actually what an image does. So I'm gonna end this video here. I hope this sort of helps you out. I tried to organize this a little bit. It's a little bit chaotic still because my life is sort of chaotic and this render is a little bit chaotic, but I'm gonna send you this file, or I guess you've already got this file. And yes, maybe I'll add something more if I can think of it.